We are going to start off with some of the basics of solving an equation. And there are just a few simple things that you can do to make this process very easy. You have actually done this a lot more than you probably think that you have. Just the ones that we've been accustomed to or been used to, you've been able to probably figure out just by looking at it. I'm going to give you a few steps in order to help you do this and make it a little more simpler. Uh, First thing is, when we do this, a lot of times the problems are going to be fairly simple, so there's not going to be a lot of combining to do. But as we start getting to more difficult problems, there's going to be a lot of combining our like terms together. So this boxing off part that we've done before becomes a lot more important. If you don't do the boxing off and you don't do the combining, the problems become a lot more difficult because there's a lot more to them. Whereas if you just combine some things together, it makes the problem a lot smaller. Our goal when we're solving equations is to always get the variable, which is the letter, by itself on one side. So for instance, we want it in the end to say x equals this because we know that then x would actually be what it says it is if it's by itself on a side. And that's what we're always going to try to do when we're solving these equations. To do that, we are going to do a lot of what we call canceling out. And you're going to figure out what that is as we go, and it's a pretty simple process, but it's something that we'll come back to over and over and over again. So these are basically the 3 steps we can go through to make this happen. Again, some of them will be simple enough that you can probably just look at them and figure out what they are. And if you can do that, that's excellent. If you can't, I've got a lot of ways that will or should help you out. Here's some examples of equations that we would say are basically down to the last step. Okay, this one we wouldn't have to do anything else with because it already tells us that x equals 5. We've reached our goal. The letter is by itself on one of these sides of the equal sign. And now it wouldn't matter if it was on this side or this side. As long as it's by itself on one of the sides, we've reached our goal. So we know that x equals 5 in this example. Down here, and you'll see a lot of this as being this is basically done. These two are basically at their last step. Here we have 2x equals 18. We do not quite have the variable by itself on a side because we still have this 2 connected to it. Okay, and we still don't have this x on a side by itself here because we have this negative 6 connected to it, so we need to get rid of that. And the process to do this is easy. Most of you guys can probably just look at this and say, oh, that's 9. Okay, 2 times 9 is 18. That makes sense. If you cannot do that, the simplest way to do it is, this is 2 times x. And when I talked about canceling out, we are doing what we would call the opposite. Okay, so the opposite of 2 times x would be divided by 2. So how I like to write this is just underneath it, I like to write divided by 2. And then the other process to canceling out is to do something to one side. You've got to do it to the other side also. So I'll just write a little divided by 2 underneath it. Now if you think about this, 2 divided by 2, those would cancel out. And I just put an x through it. If we have things that cancel out, times 2 divide 2 cancel out. That leaves us with x on this side, which is great. That's what we want. Now we just have to do 18 divided by 2. And of course, 18 divided by 2 is going to be 9. So x equals 9. Down here, it's the same thing. We've got minus 6 times x equals 48. Now, I can look at this, and I know that our solution is going to be negative 8. Negative 6 times negative 8 is positive 48. But if you don't know, we're going to do our canceling out. And canceling out involves doing the opposite. Okay, so the opposite of timesing by negative 6 is dividing by negative 6. If you ever do opposite operations, those will cancel out. So I could put my cross through there. Those have canceled out if we have opposite operations. times by negative 6, divide by negative 6 are opposite operations. So now all I have is x left over here, which is what we want. That's our goal, like we had up here. Now I need to do the same thing to this side that I did to this side. I divided by negative 6 over here to cancel out, so I need to divide by negative 6 over here to cancel out. And there's nothing to cancel out here because we don't have a times and divide as opposites, but we're just going to do this problem. 48 divided by negative 6 is negative 8. So x equals negative 8. These are what we're trying to get the problems down into that we're going to do. Make them very simple like this, then they're easy to solve. Alright, here's the first example that I'll show you, and this is going to be a fairly simple one to get down into the form that we saw before, where it was really easy to answer what it is. Okay, we could probably go through and guess a number for x, put it in for all the x's, and come up with 30. But that would take way too long. So what we're going to do is we're going to box off and combine to start with here. So if I box these off, and I notice that they're all x's, so they all are going to go together. So that would box off. That would be a negative 5x. We're taking the symbol in front of it, remember. And then we've got negative 2x equals 30. Okay, so if we combine all these together, we basically have 2 minus 5, which would be negative 3. Negative 3 plus 10 is going to be 7. And 7x minus 2x is going to be 5x. So basically what I have now is 5x over here. And over here I have equals 30. Now again, this problem is probably going to be pretty easy for you to just look at and know what x is going to be here. But if you can't